Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivraj Gacchara Satara Satashi Shiman The Divine Grace of our Charavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki ISKCON Founder Chai Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki BBT Founder Chai Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nityalila Vishnu Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivraj Gacchara Satara Satashi Shiman The Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivachari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Shri Shri Radha Govinda Go Gopinath Chamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Braja Bhumi Vrindavan Dham Ki Shri Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Shri Jagannath Puri Kshetra Dham Ki Gang Mai Ki, Jamuna Mai Ki, Bhakti Devi Ki, Srimati Tulsi Maharani Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Gaur Premanandi, all glorious to some of the devotees, all glorious to some of the devotees, all glorious to some of the devotees, all glorious to Sri Guru, Sri Guranga, and Srila Prabhupada. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, Volume 6, Chapter titled Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. Okay, we're talking about this. Of course, we know what Srila Prabhupada was discussing with Mr. Koshi. And his point he was saying was millions of zeros does not mean one. Zero is zero. If there are 7 million zeros added together, you cannot make one. There are so many. Then Mr. Koshi asked about the brainwashing controversy. Prabhupada replied, there are so many accusations, but now it is in the court. So Prabhupada is very effectively responding, even though he had no real, how can you say, concern over these things, yet just to continue the narrative. And remember, if these conversations had not taken place, we would not have this nectar to refer to. So how fortunate are we that these conversations were recorded to see Srila Prabhupada's interactions with such individuals. And this reporter, they're always looking for something sensational. So of course, Prabhupada knows that. The reporters don't understand Srila Prabhupada's depth of knowledge and intellect. You know, this is something that as devotees, we can very much appreciate, because we've seen Srila Prabhupada in so many different situations, very adeptly handling these various individuals, some inimical, some sincere. But so, jumping from one topic to another in search of readable magazine copy, Mr. Koshi asked Prabhupada, how is your health? Remember, this is Prabhupada was saying, how is your health? Not good, Prabhupada replied. Health or no health, it is the outward machine. that doesn't matter. But if it is a good machine, then it helps. That's all. Otherwise, machine good or bad, it doesn't matter. What happens when the machine stops? If your machine has stopped, Prabhupada said, you take another machine. That's all. Why shall I be overwhelmed? Oh, machine is going, machine is going. Therefore, Krishna says, you are lamenting for the machine, you nonsense. That is not the Pandit's business. Mr. Koshi, what is your typical day like? What time do you get up? How do you spend your day? How can I say, replied Prabhupada, I have got so many things. Tamal Krishna, sensing that the interview had gone on about as far as it could profitably go, spoke up. Srila Prabhupada, he said, I want to suggest that if he has some further questions, we could try to answer them. And then if there are still unanswered ones, no, said Prabhupada. He has no answer on the spiritual matter. He will ask me some political questions. We have no function in politics. Mr. Koshi disregarded the signal from Prabhupada's secretary and went on with his questions. You see, he said, when I see a group of young people like these boys here dancing in the street, it is something jarring to my eyes. What is the necessity for the chant? See, now he's getting to the point where he's trying to, dancing around all these various subjects. How is your health? How is this? How is the car? One man's food is another man's poison, Prabhupada replied laconically. No, no, said Mr. Koshi. There must be a purpose behind it. Yes, said Prabhupada. That is the way to spiritual understanding in this age. Mr. Koshi asked about illicit sex, and Prabhupada replied that sex should be used only within marriage for begetting children. Don't you think that the children should be given freedom to choose voluntarily? Do you want to give freedom to your children? Asked Prabhupada. I am asking you, said Mr. Koshi. No, no, said Prabhupada. What is the use of giving freedom to a child with a razor? He will cut his throat, that's all. But at a later age, perhaps. Later age, yes, said Prabhupada. That is enjoined. When the child is 16 years old, he can do as he likes, not before that. Now Mr. Koshi was ready to wrap it up. What is your message to the world? He asked Sri Prabhupada. Prabhupada and the devotees laughed. Again you ask me, said Srila Prabhupada. After reading Ramayana, you are asking me whose father is Sita. I have explained already. Before Mr. Koshi left the room, Prabhupada requested, write nice article. Don't worry about that, Mr. Koshi replied. It is my job. Srila Prabhupada made sure Mr. Koshi took prasadam before leaving. Disciples continued to come to Bombay in hopes of getting direct instructions from Srila Prabhupada. Much could be done through his secretary, avoiding how are you feeling conversations. Yet sometimes Prabhupada did meet directly with certain disciples. He was still involved, at least through his secretary, in most of the important dealings of his movement and its leaders. By mail, he heard Atreya Rishi's plans for introducing Krishna consciousness in Karachi, Pakistan. And he said the plans are intelligent. He saw and approved a new film by Yadubar. He met with Hansarupa Swami and requested him to develop the preaching in Sri Lanka. He heartily approved Prabhu Vishnu's going to preach in Dhaka, Bangladesh. He heard of the need for strong preachers in Hyderabad. And when Srila Prabhupada's disciple, Sridhar Swami, came to see him, he asked him to go there. He saw Lokanath Swami and encouraged him in his program of traveling by bullock cart and preaching in the Indian villages. Lokanath had brought Srila Prabhupada a Marathi translation of the Perfection of Yoga. And Srila Prabhupada sat for some time listening to Lokanath Maharaj read aloud, although Prabhupada said he didn't know the Marathi language. When in ISKCON Bombay, Pujari wanted to know if some Shalagram Shilas were bona fide, Srila Prabhupada agreed to see them, confirmed that they were genuine, and advised how they could be worshipped. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th chapter, and which text? 15. Chapter titled Calculation of Time from the Atom. Nice shloka. Yakshridja Shaktim Urudo Vachasayan Swasaktya. Yakshridja Shaktim Urudoch Vasayan Swasaktya. Pungso Brahmaya Dividhavati Bhuta Veda. Pungso Brahmaya Dividhavati Bhuta Veda. Kala Yaya Gunamayan Kratubir Vitangvans. Kalakyaya Gunamayan Kratubir Vitanvang. Tasmai Baling Haratavat Panchakaya. Tasmai Baling Haratavat Panchakaya. Please chant. Yakshridya Shaktim Urudo Chavsayan Swasaktya. Pungso Brahmaya Dividhavati Bhuta Veda. Kalakyaya Gunamayan Kratubir Vitangvans. Tasmai Baling Haratavatsara Panchakaya. Yakshridya Shaktim Rudoch Vasayan Susaktya. Pungso Brahmaya Dividhavati Bhuta Veda. Kalakyaya Gunamayan Kratubir Vitangvans. Tasmai Baling Haratavatsara Panchakaya. Yakshridya Shaktim Urudoch Vasayan Susaktya. Pungso Brahmaya Dividhavati Bhuta Veda. Kalakyaya Gunamayan Kratubir Vitanvans. Tasmai Baling Haratavatsara Panchakaya. Anyone else? Yakshridya Shaktim Rudoch Vasayan Susaktya. Pungso Brahmaya Dividhavati Bhuta Veda. Kalakya Gunamayan Kratubir Vitanvang. Tasmai Baling Haratavatsara Panchakaya. Okay, we'll read the translation and go through 16 since there's no purport for 15. O Vidura, the sun enlivens all living entities with his unlimited heat and light. He diminishes the duration of life of all living entities in order to release them from their illusion of material attachment. And he enlarges the path of elevation to the heavenly kingdom. He thus moves in the firmament with great velocity, and therefore everyone should offer him respect once every 5 years with all ingredients of worship. Text 16. Now just read it. Viduro vacha pitri deva manusyanam ayupanam idang smritam pareshang gatam achaksva yeshu kalpad bahir vidaha. Translation. Vidura said, I now understand the life durations of the residents of the Pita planets and heavenly planets, as well as that of the human beings. Now kindly inform me of the duration of life of those greatly learned living entities who are beyond the range of a kalpa. Purport. We can repeat the translation for this verse. Vidura said, I now understand the life durations of the residents of the Pita planets and heavenly planets, as well as that of the human beings. Now kindly inform me of the duration of life of those greatly learned living entities who are beyond the range of a kalpa. Purport by Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The partial dissolution of the universe that takes place at the end of Brahma's day does not affect all the planetary systems. The planets of highly learned living entities like the sages, Sanaka and Bhrigu, are not affected by the dissolution of the millenniums. All the planets are of different types, and each is controlled by a different Kala Chakra, or schedule of eternal time. The time of the Earth planet is not applicable to other, more elevated planets. Therefore, Vidura herein inquires about the duration of life on other planets. Om Jnana Tamrandasya Gananjana Shlataya Chakshura Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangu Mangaite Guram Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Diratanam. I know that Maharaj, the two Maharajas yesterday gave very nice and detailed classes. And we understand, if we didn't before, how time is relative. So we see that any example was given in various. Yesterday, the example was there of the Brahmin who went to see Lord Brahma for some benediction, marriage for his daughter. And of course, he was sitting in the waiting room. We all know what sitting in the waiting room is like. You go to the doctor's office, you sit in the waiting room, you feel like it's years. But in this poor Brahmana's case, it was not just years, it was kalpas. And he said, you've come to ask me for something, but everyone you knew is dead. Not just recently, but for thousands of years. Thousands of years. And that was the same thing with Muchakunda. When he awoke after being untimely disturbed by that Kala Yavana, and he came out of the cave, he said he saw that all the people had become pygmies. Baba had used that term, pygmies. And all the trees looked like shrubs. So this is the effect of such differences, not just on different planets, but even on this planet in different yugas. Right? So we see that, a personality like Muchakunda, who was fighting for 10,000 years. And when he woke up, he recognized, and this is the difference between, modern education and slaughterhouse education and the education given. He immediately understood that he was in Kali Yuga. by the symptoms. And what are those symptoms? That the people are now the same size as pygmies. So pygmies means minimum 1/3 size, not half size, not 3/4 size, 1/3 size, or even less. So Muchukunda was in that same category as others in that age. They were considered to be giants. Prabhupada commented that time, and we've mentioned before, that Krsna was 18 feet tall, according to our calculation. Not according to their calculation. You know, because feet and all these measurements are relative to the human body. They're measured, you see that in, they have the anga, they have cubits. These are all the measurements of a person's body. So a foot to Muchukunda or to Krishna is not the same as our foot. And when we read about Krishna's chariot going from Dwarka to the kingdom of Vidarbha, Prabhupada said minimum 1,000 miles, but accomplishing how many hours? 12 hours. 12 hours. Of course, these are his special horses that Daruka had horses. Krishna specifically asked for his special horses. Mega Pushpa, Saibya. What are the other names? Mega Pushpa, Saibya. One is the color of a cloud, one is silver color, another is green color. Krishna's special horses. So all these things, they're inconceivable unless you're reading the Vedas. Who would understand this calculation of time from the atom? Of course, now we have so-called atomic clocks. 5,000 years later, they've just come up with atomic clocks. Right? So this is the advancement of civilization. And now we have atomic clocks that just keep time automatically. But there was no such need, because this people were aware, so aware of everything. Yeah? They didn't have to have watches. They didn't have to have calculators. They didn't have to have computers. Yeah? Everything was self-contained. And now because of our less intelligence, we have to have something else to do the things which the human brain in a different age automatically compensated for. But this is further symptoms of Kali Yuga, right? So this is the purport. It's not so much that we're concerned about the calculation of time from the atom. It's interesting to know, but we juxtapose it to the level of education now and see how far we've degraded that, such information readily available 5,000 years ago is not even spoken of. They talk about relativity in a very passing way, and the Maharajas have gone about how time slows down as you approach the speed of light. Yeah, the scientists could understand that now, again, after 5,000 years. And it talks about the higher planetary systems and their differences in time. And the scientists, they could extrapolate. They know, for instance, that the solar day on Jupiter, do you know how long the day is on Jupiter? We calculate the day as the revolution of the sun, right? The Earth's passage, 12 hours, 24 hours, like that. Revolving. So how long? What's the orbit of Jupiter around the sun? Do you know, Jimmy? Not so much. Jupiter is only 36 years. Pluto might be 300 something years. But that means a day and a night on Jupiter is 36 of our years. So then a living entity on Jupiter, right? One of his days is 36 of our years, just like on the relative difference between the demigods, their 1 year is how many of our years? Yeah, 10,000, right? Is it 10,000? Or is it just Lord Brahma? Lord Brahma, he left for a moment, Lavamatra, 1/11 of a second. You can calculate. 1/11 a second was one human year. And we know that Lord Brahma, so that what's his 1 year then? If his 1/11 of a second, so how many seconds in a day? So that means 11 years in 1 second. Right? His 1 second is our 11 years. So how many seconds? 360 seconds in a minute, 360 seconds in an hour. You calculate that, and we know that Lord Brahma lives to be 311 trillion of our years. Right? So the demigods in general, their life, whatever. Maybe their 6 months is our 1 day, but some fantastic amount. So all these things were known here in the Vedas 5,000 years ago. So that's the point, not to get caught up in all these different calculations. That this information was available. And so therefore we can understand, just like Prabhupada described, that when you, with regards to analogy and the truth, that if you want to test whether or not a pot of rice is finished, you can just take 1 grain from the center and you can understand that the pot is cooked. So in the same way, we're experiencing every day so many of these grains of rice in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. And we're hearing and we're seeing, and this truth is being constantly refreshed. You know, that how we're waking up to this knowledge after so many cycles and evolutions in human and other births. But still, so many sleeping souls are out there. And therefore, Prabhupada has made it so easy for them through not just his interviews with these newspaper reporters and trying to give them some knowledge, but these transcendental essays, Prabhupada's devotional ecstasy, which has been converted into written form, which we're distributing regularly, penetrates into the heart of the living entity. This is this specific potency of a pure devotee, Sakshad Hari. He is internally the super soul in that sense. Externally, we see that he's Chaitya Guru, but you know, how is it that Krishna has given such mercy, you know, in the world today when there's so much wrong, that he allows his pure devotee to come into the most abominable situation, like the Lower East Side, filled with the bumps, right? The bumps, the alcoholic bumps, Prabhupada called them. You used to have to step over them to go into the Bowery loft. Those lofts are called, if you look at them, it says AIR. Anyone know what AIR means? It was specific. You would think it means air, but it doesn't. The city was giving some facility to artists, so they gave these old industrial lofts on the Lower East Side. So they had a term called artist in residence, AIR loft. Only for artists. You had to prove that you were an artist. And they would give you this loft, which is a big open space. There's no individual rooms. Loft means undivided space. So that was one of those AIR lofts that Srila Prabhupada was sharing with, what was his name? Paul Murray. Paul Murray. Where he kept his cat food in the same refrigerator. That was Carl Jurgens? Well, Murray is the one who chased Prabhupada out with the acid trip. Same thing. Anyway, so Prabhupada had to endure so much. Krishna's personal messenger. We very difficult for us to reconcile our behavior in relationship. Just like when we come before Radha Govinda, they are obviously royalty. But still, somehow or other, we have that tendency to be complacent and not give the proper attitude. It's like if you're in the military and you don't stand at attention in the presence of a superior officer, you're in big trouble. Insubordination. You can't speak out of turn. You can't show lack of respect through your posture. So we have to also develop that attitude. There's no, this whole purpose of our living in the temple is to have that opportunity. And if we take it for granted, then that opportunity is lost, even if we're here. So we have to concentrate and focus. Not just that, we wake up and then by some routine, we attend these programs, and we have to understand why. What is the why behind our actions? Otherwise, you'll see that some Mr. Koshi will come up and say that we're brainwashed. Why? Because you're doing the same thing every day and not knowing why. Right? That was niyamagraha and niyamagraha. Right? Following the rules and regulations without knowing why, or not following, it's the same. It's the same negative result. So you have to know why are we following these rules and regulations to develop our love for the Lord through these actions, small, incremental. Even when we don't want to do something, we convince ourselves what is the right thing, right behavior. So everything plays into that within the environment, whether it's the corporate world or the spiritual ashram, everyone has to accommodate a particular environment. And we're fortunate that Prabhupada created this special environment that they have. When people like Elon Musk envision the future of the human race, do you know what that is? Extraterrestrial population. They want to leave this Earth planet and go to some place like Mars. Well, they have to set up a particular self-contained environment because it's not meant for human beings in these bodies. But they don't understand that they're just wasting their time. Instead of concentrating on reality, they're preoccupied with this fictional concept that has been somehow inculcated through, in one sense, it's the vestigial understanding that they may have had from previous births that means we're supposed to be in the spiritual world. Or some materialist who's trying to go to another planet, the planets of the demigods. So it's there. They don't know where it's coming from. It's some latent desire that to go to the stars, to look up, and they have that concept that man only can appreciate the cosmos. The lower animals cannot. But he doesn't understand why he's supposed to be appreciating that. to understand that we're not alone. That this is just one insignificant planet. Like the analogy of Tamal Krishna Goswami, Prabhupada in Los Angeles told him, and here is Tamal Krishna thinking himself something very special. So this is the scientists, these are the billionaires, they're all like that. It doesn't matter whether one is the poorest person or the richest person. Everyone can have the same misconception. But only the devotees have the opportunity to clear that and to instruct others on this timeless knowledge. And so therefore it's a great responsibility. It's just like when you see a problem, you take ownership of it, regardless of how small or big it is. Of course, a big man will say, it's not my job to worry about the small things, right? They have that saying, don't sweat the small stuff. They even wrote a book about it. Don't sweat the small stuff. And that's applicable in certain circumstances. For us, the small stuff would be, don't worry about, oh, there's no hot water today, or there's not enough prasadam today, or this or that. These are small things, insignificant. They're inconveniences. They're not problems. It's inconvenience. So we have to gradually mature to that level where we don't become disturbed. I mean, isn't that the whole thing? Matrak sparshasta konteya sitoshna sukha dukkha agama paino nityas tamstatik shastra bharata. Matrak sparshasta konteya. A non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and a disappearance in due course, like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So that's just the one example. The water is the same, winter and summer. Cold water is cold in the winter. Hot water is also hot. But in the summer, hot water is uncomfortable, and cold water is comfortable. And in wintertime, it's just the opposite. So this is the whole point. And, the fact, and then when we're just speaking in general terms to those who are unfamiliar with the philosophy, we can relate to them. That's the point, is that after assimilating this knowledge, we're able to repeat, as Srila Prabhupada did for our benefit, in some simple language without altering the substance, but delivering the message, according to time and circumstance. This is what it means, time and circumstance. Doesn't mean time and circumstance that I'm on in Sankirtan and it's a Kadasi, I'm going to eat grains today. No, that's not time and circumstance. It can be. Prabhupada even authorized it. But these are extreme situations. If you're starving, you got no strength left to crawl back up into the Sankirtan van and get another case of books out. Everyone experiences some austerity. You learn. This is how we advance. Austerity is the wealth of the Brahmanas. So where does that austerity come from? It's a very comfortable situation here. We have nice facility. When Mukundashraya makes sure that the heat is on or the water pumps are running and everything is good. What's the problem? People are paying for a studio apartment down the block. Anybody know how much it costs? Studio means just one room. $2,300, $2,600 to $3,000 a month. And you're living here for free. And getting delicious Krishna prasadam. And seeing the beautiful forms of their lordships every morning. This is priceless. This is priceless. So but it's only priceless to those who know the value. All right? Just like a person who is unintelligent, if he finds something valuable, he overlooks it. He doesn't understand that this is some priceless gem. When they say diamond in the rough, do you know what that means? Diamond in the rough? That means diamond in situ. That means when it's still embedded in its, whatever the stone was from that geological period. That's called in situ. So diamond rough looks like just like a stone. You have to know what that surrounding geology is supposed to look like. And then you can appreciate, oh, there's a diamond here. It may not be obvious, but then as you cut away all the excess material, then you see it. But again, a diamond in the rough means it's not cut, it's not polished, it's in its raw form, but it's a diamond. And when it's properly handled and cut and polished, could be worth tens of thousands or even $1 million. But unless you know, right? Isn't that's a common meme now, right? People say, if you know, you know. Have you heard that? Have you seen that? If you know, you know. And you see some situation. Yes, and if you know, you know. In other words, if you have experience, then you know it. And if you don't, then it's just a random picture or video or meme, and you don't understand because you have no perspective. And in the Bhagavad Gita, that's the criteria, main criteria for intelligence, is to understand things in their proper perspective. So we can understand the diamond of Krishna consciousness. Others cannot yet. So it is our duty to try to bring it to them and highlight the value, just like trying to sell a diamond to someone who doesn't understand. And Prabhupada used that analogy, that this is, you cannot purchase a diamond cheaply. A diamond has its value, intrinsic value. It means it cannot be diminished. So this philosophy has intrinsic value to those who know. If you know, you know. So we have to try to understand it, what do they say, backwards and forwards, so that you can speak to someone and answer their questions intelligently from any angle. They may ask you something that you haven't considered previously, from that perspective. But if you know the philosophy, then Krishna will allow you to speak it just for the understanding of that person. So this is the nectar of preaching. This is the nectar of preaching, that Krishna, you feel how Krishna, Sarva Sichaham Riddhi Sani Vishtom Muktak Smriti Agyanam Pavanam Cha. You feel how Krishna is knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. You experience it. And when you experience it, you don't forget that experience. It becomes engraved permanently that, yes, this is how it works. Right? We learn these verses. Maybe we haven't used them in 10 years, but in a matter of a few minutes in speaking to someone, all of a sudden, that verse pops up. Because Krishna allowed it to. Otherwise, you stumble on something, and it happens to me a lot. When you're trying to remember a verse and you cannot remember it. I know that verse. I remembered it. It begins with A. What is that? You have to struggle. Anya Bilasa Tasun. What is that? Is that the one? You think, is that the one? Maybe it's the other one. No, maybe it's another one. I know it begins with A. But if you're speaking to someone in Krishna consciousness, in that setting of the preaching, then Krishna just allows it to come out. Especially like when you're speaking with the devotees, right? There's many famous verses for the Atyahara Priyasascha, Pajapa Niyamagraha. Over collecting, over endeavoring. We have to be careful of those things, especially for devotees. Sometimes you'll see when God brother, when I was a new devotee in Henry Street, we lived, there was a few places, but the big common room on the 3rd floor was like the main ashram sleeping room, just a big open room. And it had lockers on one side, school lockers like we have downstairs. Not the little ones with the one door, but the ones before you go to the kitchen, the tall ones. So they had those all around the room, and everybody had one locker. You know, and you could put a lock on it, just like school, and had your Bhagavad Gita, your Nectar devotion, you know, your Sri Isha Upanishad, the books you used every day. We didn't have a whole collection of books. There wasn't a whole collection of books when I joined. When I joined, they were just finishing 3rd canto. So we had, this one devotee, as we're, he was famous for accumulating things. And so whenever someone would leave or there would be an empty locker, he would claim it. You wouldn't know it unless, you know, you were there and saw that he had several lockers. Otherwise, everyone's thinking that everyone has one locker. So this tendency is there, over collecting, you know, holding to prasadam. That was another thing. We never did that. But this devotee always had a stash of prasadam in his locker. You know, it's a certain mentality, you know, so that was that. Atihara. So we want to take advantage of the opportunity to perform austerity, to develop even a taste for it, you know, for renunciation, because it will serve you well. And when the opportunity arises, when you need to have that. Probably I was reading in Krishna book where Prabhupada said Krishna's greatest opulence. What's Krishna's greatest opulence? There's 6, right? Wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and Prabhupada said renunciation is Krishna's greatest opulence. Because if you have everything, but then you can give it up, that makes that particular quality superior. So we should meditate on that and see how we can implement it, you know, in our own daily devotion. You know, not that artificially you renounce something. Yukta vairagya uchita. You dovetail whatever you can in Krishna service, but you have to know what is superfluous. You have to develop that ability to determine this is superfluous. I don't need this. But, you know, this is not artificial. There's another blessing of being in the ashram. We have so much opportunity to see which devotees, who to associate with, who is demonstrating these qualities that I want to emulate. You know, there are certain, you know, I mean, there were so many good examples when I was a new devotee, when I was growing up in Krishna consciousness, you know, and amazing what those devotees could accomplish, you know, as they progressed. Even after, you know, we think that people are qualified after 4 years or 8 years of college. You know, but what do? They go out and they get a job and they work. They don't, you know, maybe one of them will become famous because they patented something at some point. But devotees can go anywhere in the world and start a center for Krishna consciousness, you know, and bring about a revolution, you know, within the minds of the common people to elevate them. That is significant. That is significant. You know, to discover some insignificant, you know, forest insect, you know, this is not an accomplishment. You know, 8,400,000 species of life, and they always say, "Oh, a new species of frog has been found in Vietnam, never before." So who cares? Who cares? Is that going to change the course of the world? No, nothing. Unless you're a frog eater, right? There's many frogs' legs. Come on, people. There's a delicacy in France. Frogs' legs. Not that. Not only that. What else do they eat there? That's so-called delicacy. Come on. Who's our Francophile here? Escargot. What's escargot? What is that? Snails. Snails. Prabhupada said it's like eating pus. He said that with regards to lobsters. Of course they do. They take this crustacean. These are scavengers. These are like the pigs of the sea. They're bottom feeders. Okay, when someone calls you a bottom feeder, that's an insult, by the way, in case anyone ever calls you a bottom feeder. Because these things, they crawl along the bottom, they eat all the dead matter, lobsters and things like that. And then people catch them and they think, oh, this is a delicacy. Lobster tails. Ever see how much lobster tails cost? And what do? They get these special little forks and they pry out this white flesh. And that's the flesh of Prabhupada said, it's like eating pus. Everyone knows what pus is. We don't want to, it's before breakfast. We don't want to get into too many details. Pus is that secretion from an infection on your skin. It's terrible. Okay, David Dalman just realized what it means. How do you say pus in Russian? Sadashiva will remember. Tell us later. Tell us before breakfast or after, not during. So all these things are there. We can, humans in Kali Yuga are living abominable lives. They have no shelter. They have no hope, literally. And we're the only ones that can give them hope by bringing the light of the Bhagavatam into their association. And illuminates everything. This is the whole point. It illuminates everything. So let's read the text again. What do we started with 15? Okay. And here's what it says. O Vidura, the sun enlivens all living entities with unlimited heat and light. He diminishes the duration of life of all living entities in order to release them from their illusion of material attachment. How does he do that? Because as you become old, you're supposed to become contemplative and wonder, why am I growing old? What is the purpose of life? Right? If I know that I'm going to die, there must be some reason for having lived. What is that reason? So that's what is the reason? And he enlarges the path of elevation to the heavenly kingdom. He enlarges the path of elevation to the heavenly kingdom. He thus moves in the firmament with great velocity, and therefore everyone should offer him respect once every 5 years with all ingredients of worship. And if we're remembering these things, if we remember that, all the purports in this calculation of time from the atom, essentially it's there to deliver us from illusion, not to give us a headache about trying to remember all these minute details. Just to relieve us from illusion. That time exists. It's inescapable. No one can avoid it. And we see now through this expansion of understanding the reality of it. Imagine if someone came to you and said, there's no time, it's just in your mind. People are so foolish like that. They're so over-intelligent that they say, no, time is within every living entity, with everything that exists in the material world. The time factor is pervading. There's a beginning and an end. Even in the Bible, they have that, but they don't understand it. It says that there's the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end, but they have no appreciation because there's no purports. There's no one qualified to give them purports. So it all devolves into sentimentality, right? Religion without philosophy is sentiment. And what is philosophy without religion? Mental speculation. See how succinctly Srila Bhaktisiddhanta could put that? That's called a sutra, a code. Information compressed into few words, minimum words, maximum effect. So yes, everyone who's taken to this philosophy with a little understanding, he should be recognized as the most intelligent human being. And so therefore we treat our God brothers and God sisters with a certain level of respect, even just by walking into the door. Yeah? Because we know that they've been on a long journey, just like you welcome a weary traveler. He's been on the road. He's tired, he's thirsty, he's hungry. When a person steps through the door of the temple, they've been on a journey of millions of births. And we're here to give them the refreshment they need to nurture their eternal soul. So this is our duty. Prabhupada said the temple is only for making devotees. It's not for our comfort. It's only for making devotees. Do I repeat that too many times, Chaitanya? I must say it at least once every class. Huh? The temple is only for making devotees. Any questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Arjuna Anand.
Hare Krishna. So during the course of your lecture, you were mentioning that sometimes some things we experience are not problems, they're inconveniences. So my question was, how do we differentiate what is an inconvenience? How can we say, oh, this is an inconvenience, let me tolerate, and oh, this is a problem, let me
That's a very good question.
solve it.
What is the difference between a problem and an inconvenience? Okay. An inconvenience is something which is a minor disturbance. I missed lunch. It's an inconvenience. A problem is you're flying an airplane and you're running out of fuel and there's no place to land. That's a problem. What did the astronauts say in Apollo 11 when they called to mission control in Houston? Says, we have a problem. They didn't say we have an inconvenience. We have a problem. Problem means life and death. That's the quick, short answer, life and death. But some people can't distinguish them. They treat every inconvenience as a matter of life and death. Oh, Prabhu, I missed lunch. I can't do my service. I can't go on Sankirtan. I'm gonna bloop.
So can we say if it's very severe, then it becomes, if something is very severe.
Something is very?
Severe.
Yeah,
then it becomes a problem. If it's manageable for us, then it's an inconvenience.
And technically, yes. We have options. And that was another that came from that particular incident, the Apollo 11. And what was that? Failure is not an option. Failure is not an option. So we have to treat spiritual life like that. Some people are thinking that, well, I could always go back to the material world, finish my college degree, go get a job, But that technically is the loss of the boon of human life. It's like throwing it away. It's like somebody saying, I'll give you $1 million if you just complete this task. And the person thinks, no, it's too hard. And then he justifies, I don't need this $1 million anyway. What do they call that? Sour grapes. You know that you've heard that fable, Aesop's fable, sour grapes? About the crow who couldn't get, he said, oh, they must be sour anyway, because you couldn't achieve it. So that was his excuse. They must be sour. So sour grapes.
So if a person, for an example, just to understand this, for someone it may be an inconvenience, say missing lunch or whatever, say cold food, but for another it can be very detrimental to his health. So how can we categorize something as an inconvenience when it becomes very individual? Like
when it becomes very,
like it's very a personal problem. A person for a same problem, for one it can be very severe, like missing lunch can be very detrimental to his health.
well, if
whereas-
you're diabetic and you miss your medicine or your meal, yes, that can be severe. You're in a diseased condition. But we're talking generally, you know, if there is, so yes, for a person who has to have his certain level of glucose or whatever, then missing a meal could trigger a severe situation. But that's not common. You have to speak about general, and then you can deal with the exceptions individually. There'll always be exceptions to the rule, but that's the definition of exception. It is not the ordinary consideration. So, yes, Chaitanya.
We're making Prabhu about how the temple is only here to make new devotees. And one thing that reminded me of is Brahmananda Prabhu when he was in, I believe he was in Africa, and he was preaching to Indians. And Prabhupada came and he saw that it was only Indians coming. And he said, you should preach to the local people. He said, wherever you go, you should always preach to the local people. And that should be the focus. So we have the Tuesday program, but also Sunday. I see a lot of more local people are coming on Sunday. So we're trying to think of different ways to cater to them.
Well, we always had this situation. It's not something new. In the past, we would identify, you're here, you're in the kirtan, you look around, you see, oh, this looks like a new person. Sometimes I'll ask at the announcements, anybody here for the first time? That's a clue to you to identify that person. And when they leave the temple room, to go on the line for prasadam, to introduce yourself. Otherwise, why am I saying who's here for the first time? It's to give them a welcome packet and for everybody to see that they're here and to link up. Right? There's a difference. Link up. So there'll be many. Then you go down and you sit together at the table and you help them with whatever, get them to the front of the line. That should be the standard. Any devotee with a guest can go immediately to the front of the line. He doesn't have to wait on the whole line. You want them to get special treatment. You want them to feel special. Okay, so we can continue to implement that. It's always there, but some people don't know it. If you're with a guest, you immediately go to the front of the line. You know, everyone else can be patient. They're there every Sunday. They know the drill. But when you have a guest, you go to the front of the line. That is our duty, to show special treatment. You know, then, you know, it's without making devotees, eventually a center will dry up like a plant without water. You have to continue. This is, Prabhupada's started this process. It's not something we concocted. You know, someone says, oh, you don't need temples anymore. Yeah, Prabhupada at one point said, you don't need temples, no more new temples, only reading rooms and restaurants. He mentioned that. At that time, we had hundreds of temples, 1976. You know, so many temples. But there were some countries that didn't still have temples, right? Russia was not open yet. China was still not open. But in some places, it wasn't required that you have to have 3 temples in the same city. That's the point. You know. So we have to develop. Now we have the Lotus Room. We had a library, Bhaktivedanta Library upstairs. We should, when we build a new building next door, we will fulfill Prabhupada's desire to have a reading room like the one that he saw on Central Park South when he was walking, when we used from 55th Street, from the temple, he would go to Central Park. He would walk down 5th Avenue South, Park Avenue South, or Central Park South, which is the block facing north, looking into Central Park. It's a very prestigious address. Probably the most prestigious address in New York City, Central Park South. You know, you have a penthouse, you look over this huge expanse of Central Park. Beautiful view. On the bottom of that building is what's called a Christian Science reading room. Very popular amongst the intellectual class. You probably acknowledge that. Floor to ceiling glass, and all you see is rows of books. They're called stacks. And then very comfortable, easy chairs for reading. And gentlemen sitting in there reading these books. So Prabhupada wanted that. Reading room for it. Class of men, intelligent class of men to come in, take advantage. Has to be kept bucket, spotless. These rooms, spotless. Beautifully appointed. You know, wood, soft chairs, you know, just the right amount of light. You know, we forget that Srila Prabhupada is a Vaikuntha man sometimes, you know. He was not an uncultured rogue or ruffian like us, like me, not like Arjuna. You know, we were not born in Brahmin families, but Prabhupada was aristocratic. So we should try to please him to that extent, not disappoint him with our uncouth behavior. You can look that word up, David Damodar, uncouth. Any other questions or comments? It's getting late for the prasadam. And we have a lot to do today to get ready for the Sunday feast. And I have to pick up my friend, my godson, Nandu, god nephew, at the airport tonight, visiting. Yashomashi, that's your Mantinandam Prabhu's son, one of his sons. So, then we'll end the class. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaur Premanandi.